tuning in to our podcast today. My name's Andy Drake, and I'm based in Leeds and manage the Talent Hub program here, and have a number of roles in athletics. Alongside that, running the part of the targeted events program in England Athletics, managing the race walk part of that, and I work on British Athletics on the world class program as a coach as well. So we're looking at planning, training, periodization. So this is a part 2 of this topic. And last week we looked at sort of how we put what might go into like an individual plan for say for the season, and and broke that down into its sort of constituent elements. So that's on, if you weren't with us last week, that's on Athletics Hub, so you can have a look at that, and we're going to sort of follow on from that this week. Cool. So just to start with, if I've used this slide on all of the webinars thus far, as coaches and athletes, and we've got a mix of both on here. Then wherever we are, we're at some point between the two athletes on the image here. So that's the kind of the space that we're working in. And then I've actually used this one a couple of times as well. In terms of specifically the race walk event group, then we have this sort of big challenge of at the sort of the championship type distances. Of course, we race lots of other distances in and around all of these, but yeah, some big jumps that also kind of link into some key key stages in terms of like just individual development, particularly around sort of the transition from junior to senior athlete. Lots of changes linked to adolescence, and sort of psychosocial development as well, let alone the fact that your championship distance has probably doubled, and as well as that, if you're going to be successful in it, you've got to get faster as well. So that's some of the challenges we have in in the event group. In terms of planning and periodization, it's probably quite a generic topic. It is a generic topic, and so one of the slides that we looked at last week, was looking at, we said, well, if we're putting a plan together, then, we're probably going to look at sort of when are our key races, when have we got things like training camps, plot those into our calendar, and I guess then there's some of the other, I guess we put, we said here, key interventions or milestones. I think what we mean by that would be, might be that we would do some specific things in training. I think that lends itself to this idea of periodization, which in essence just is about, we've broken our year down there into 4 blocks. Do you have a different focus in each of those times? Really, that's what periodization is about. So are you doing different things at different periods of time? And then we've got some, we said in there, milestones. That's a reflection that all of this sits in real life, even though that's somewhat on hold at the moment for most of us. So just need to perhaps put it into context as well. So that's enough of the repeat slides, and let's get into then some more stuff in terms of that's specific about periodization. Right. Okay. Complex looking slide. Hopefully your screen is big enough to pick this out. This is if you've done any coach education courses through now World Athletics, then as you get through to their sort of level 2, 3 type courses, you might well have come across this, and I'm sure it's appeared in in a variety of places. But Peter Thompson, who's behind a lot of their coach ed, has put this together, and it's this is talking about do we have how to periodize the training year? So do we have, what we mean by single periodization would be that we'd perhaps have one big focus and try and peak once in a year. Okay, in reality, we might try and do that more than once. And I guess this sort of little flow chart, what it tries to do is give us some guidance on whether, we go to the, if we go to the effort of planning in that much detail, how is it appropriate for the athletes that we're working with? And so we've got along the top row there, we can sort of group our athletes in terms of their chronological age, but I think I think if we've come on a number of these webinars already, and through our coach heads, we'll be familiar with the idea that, of course, chronological age and actual sort of biological age can be two different things depending on our sort of whether we classify ourselves in terms of like perhaps an early or a late maturing athlete. So this, we can have some thoughts on that. But I think the key thing there is once we get about halfway down, the question is, does the athlete have basic skills? Yes or no. Have we got decent agility, balance, coordination? Have we got some speed? And then, have we got some sort of kinesthetic awareness of, kind of like the space that we're in? Can we sort of create sort of gliding and buoyant movements, probably related to kind of a pool environment? Can we catch things, kick things, or strike things, which are all kind of wrapped up in physical literacy. Excuse me. Not all specific. There's not much kicking in track and field, but if we're a decent all-round athlete with good physical literacy, then we can probably do these things, and that's what we're looking for. So that's what we're looking at in terms of basic skills. This is we're looking at this from the perspective of the race walk event group. So you'd include the key sort of technical elements of that as well in there. And if the answer is no, then we're not going to be sort of planning and periodizing training in great detail. And if we're just young athletes, then we're just sort of interested in things, just kids athletics, and actually getting involved and trying out lots of different things, and really enjoying ourselves. And if we don't have much of a training age, what we mean by that is how many years have you spent sort of doing dedicated athletics training? Again, probably little need for periodizing the training in great detail. We're just in that sort of stage that if you looked at some of the webinars I've done earlier when we looked at sort of athlete development, then we might have called it like a sampling stage in a model that we might have used before we sort of get into thinking about like specializing and then kind of investing our time and effort into really finding out how good we can be. So there's some idea, basically this is saying that the more experienced the athlete, then perhaps the greater the need for sort of a periodized training year where we're really going to sort of focus on specific, sort of planning and blocks of work. All right. So in essence, that's the sort of challenge we're faced with off the back of sort of mapping out our goal for the year in terms of plotting it on a calendar. And then of course we're actually going to go training. So let's let's sort of get into this, and this is really our focus for the bulk of this morning's session, is how we sort of make sense of when and where to sort of when and where to work hard. So I think people are probably familiar with a diagram like this. So a guy called Hans Sale actually looked at modeling stress, and it's where we get a lot of our initial ideas from about yeah, how we adapt to stress. But training is a stress. So if we, you know, we do a training session, we're tired from that, but we recover, and we probably recover to a slightly higher level, you know, because of, you know, multiple adaptations to the body's structures and systems. And yeah, then we go training again, we get some more adaptations, and so on. And yeah, if we get it right, we get really fit, which is a huge simplification. We can be a little bit smarter in terms of understanding what the training session has done to us. And so yeah, Eric Bannister is a sort of, I guess, the guy who first sort of really started to I guess sort of, you know, try and quantify this and make some sense of it. And so, and we'll be familiar with this in terms of when we prescribe a training session, then, you know, we'll ask the athletes to work at different intensities and for different periods of time. So, you know, if you do 30 minutes of easy race walking, then, you know, it's a low intensity. So that training load would be different to, yeah, if you did 30 minutes at, you know, your 10-kilometer race pace, that would be a much, you know, a much higher training load. Therefore, you know, we'd experience a different amount of fatigue and so on and so forth. And Bannister called this a training impulse. So you might be familiar and come across the word TRIMP in terms of a way that we can try and work out how we're loading athletes up. And you know, that's quite a straightforward, you know, it's a straightforward thing to do. Bannister then went on and looked at this in a little bit more detail in terms of that TRIMP, and this is where we get some of these ideas from. So we've got, yeah, on the left-hand side of the screen there, we've got training input in red, and then in blue, you know, flipped up on one side, we've got fitness, and in pink we have fatigue. If we consider these two like from a sort of a mathematical equation, so, you know, fitness being, I guess, being the positive side of that, and fatigue being the negative side of that. If we add the two together, then we get the result of that is like the performance that we can produce. So then we look on the right hand side, we've put a little chart together of that showing we've done our training session with fatigue from that. And I guess, so if we just think about the fatigue, then you know, we often organize training, sort of hard day, easy day, things like that. Then you know, yeah, so we may not be, so I guess the fatiguing elements of this probably last for about a week, although we tend to kind of notice them more acutely over a couple of days. If we think about things like delayed onset muscle soreness, you know, we perhaps feel that sort of 48 hours after a big training session. So yeah, elements of fatigue perhaps last for a week. The fitness that we gain from the training session, yeah, perhaps certainly lasts for longer than that, perhaps for a month. So we're making some big assumptions here. You know, so many sort of structures and systems are impacted in terms of fitness and fatigue. And if we, you know, we could, this would be a topic for yeah, at least one webinar in its own right to look at, you know, how different systems, different structures respond to training. So we've made some big assumptions there, and we've just like squished it all onto yeah, onto these lines here on our chart. But in terms of, you know, just sort of getting our heads around, yeah, putting training together and planning, then, you know, let's just work, yeah, just work with that. But just knowing that there's a whole bunch of assumptions that go into this, and with the calculations that we do for this sort of thing are all, they're arbitrary numbers. They're yeah, they're not a specific value relating to you know, something like a particular speed that you can achieve, for example. So we said that fitness and fatigue, the sum of the two of them then impacts on performance. So if we see there initially that fatigue line spikes up, so performance level drops down, because even though we're building some fitness, you're fatigued from that. So and then we can see that yellow performance line, once it dips down, then it comes up when we're getting our adaptations. And as we get further away from the fatigue, then the performance level increases. So I guess one way of looking about this is sort of high level performance is not, yes, it's about being fit, but it requires an absence of fatigue for us to get the best out of ourselves. And we can, we have some tools that were available to us, that will help us understand that. So things that we can use to measure training input. So like internally, if you've got a heart rate monitor, you can see the response of your, as shown by your pulse rate in the training session. And we can record that and quantify that. So that goes back to the the TRIMP idea. In terms of the intensity, duration, we can also start to get an internal measure of that in terms of heart rate. And then externally, things like a GPS watch, will also then that can tell us about how the speed and the distance, for example. We've just highlighted up there. There's the little Training Peaks logo on there. So that's a piece of software that actually does all of these fitness, fatigue, performance calculations. For us. We'll look at some Excel spreadsheet versions a little bit later on this morning. But having a piece of software that runs all of this stuff for me is massively helpful in terms of the time that it saves. And I guess one of the things we'd be concerned about as a coach, in terms of like the managing training, is our duty of care, and we want to get the most performance we can from our particular training sessions or blocks of training. Of course, we don't want to hurt athletes. So, managing, sort of using these as a tool to manage fatigue is also where this sort of modeling is useful for us. So, we said we've got like the internal measures. We could use things like heart rate, but we could also skip to the bottom one, which is measuring blood lactate. That gives us some useful information about how we're responding quite acutely to a particular training session. So we might have the opportunity sometimes to do that, in training. So Boz is there with Kate Spilsbury, our former physiologist, who's moved to Australia now, so sadly missed. Measuring lactates is one thing we can do. But actually, just a real simple and really, really useful tool, is actually just recording, your perceived exertion for that particular training session on a score of 1 to 10. 10 being like it was really tough. There's lots of value in that really, really sort of simple measure. And then from an external point of view, calculating, using perhaps the GPS watch, something like that, just to record in detail the training will actually allow us to sort of calculate those TRIMPs, or training stress score is just another word for TRIMP. So a number of ways that there we can start to sort of understand how fatiguing our training sessions have been. So a big concern there. We want to avoid injuring athletes or making them ill. And actually, our next slide would just sort of give a few of those, pull a few of those ideas together. So we've got the the recording stuff on, recording the training session. Taking lactates. We also, if we have take the opportunity with athletes, big injury risk, is often sort of bony injuries. And there's certainly a relationship there with training load. So, if we take the opportunity with sort of high level performers who are doing a high load of training, then periodically we can run a DEXA scan that will tell us about their bone health, and nutrition would be a factor in there. So a real simple technique there is something called snap and send. So athlete takes a picture of their meal, sends it to a sports nutritionist, just as a simple visual cue in terms of getting an idea of where the energy is coming from. So just flip back to that slide there. Yeah, so we want to look at, understand our training inputs and our performance outputs. There's a number of sort of tools we have at our disposal that that can help us do that. And I would imagine you're familiar with those. And hey, if you have no tools available to you whatsoever, question to athlete post-training session, how tough was that 1 to 10, is a simple and really reliable way of doing that. Right. So that's looking perhaps at individual sessions. We're one of the things we're interested in this morning is looking at how we sort of put all of this together over extended periods of time. And so if we look at specifically at Morton's work, we took on big application of all of Bannister's work, looking at modeling training and overtraining. Okay, so it's pretty easy to write really tough training sessions and hurt people. So we want to be a bit smarter than that. So one of the things that Morton did is that these guys looked at by calculating all the training loads, then they looked at when does training really have a big impact on competition performance. So and their work showed that they would argue that sort of 4 to 12 weeks out, so an 8-week block starting 4 weeks away from competition is I've called it here, labeled it up, called it the sweet spot. So this is perhaps when training would have the most impact on competition performance. That's not to say that I don't think anybody stops training a month before competition, but it's training has the training sessions in the 4 weeks prior to competition have less of an impact. Probably still actually working hard. So this isn't necessarily this is a figure that shows us the impact or the degree of influence of each training session. But perhaps it gives us some ideas about, because the impacts are diminishing, then perhaps then in terms of how we manage training, even if we're continuing to work hard in some of that time and perhaps going into a kind of an out and out taper in the week, 10 days or so before competition, then but it might tell us that if the athlete is just tired and the training session is not happening, well, it probably perhaps at this stage it isn't critical to competition performance, so we'd have some confidence in in backing off at that point. Whereas if we're like 11 weeks out, we might just decide that we're going to get through this training session. So just the language and sort of philosophy behind what we're doing might change in that time. So, but I think this is a useful bit of work that's been done, because it can help sort of inform how we'd organise training. And then all these graphs that we've looked at so far are nice and smooth, all textbook stuff. Then you get into the real world and it gets a bit more messy. So here we've got the same ideas, same principles. So we can see as a result of training sessions, then we can see in blue, which is also shaded here, we can see the development of fitness. So this is Tom Bosworth going into, this is the training in the year that led up to World Champs in Doha. So we can see development of fitness. We can see fatigue with the pink lines, and then we can see the performance athletes, the performance outputs from the sum. So, you know, fitness with fitness and fatigue, and that interaction of the two of them. Yeah, so you can see, you know, and what we've also plotted on here, these were the 20-kilometer, he did a number of other races over shorter distances, but these were his Olympic distance 20-kilometer races in 2019. And yeah, so if we, you know, if we just track all of this through, then you can see, you know, there's sort of hard blocks of training. Then we've got some rest periods in there. And then we can see where we start to back away from training. Probably the clearest one actually is the World Champs one in Doha, because there's too many races in the middle there that mess up our chart. But you can see, you know, there's you know, two big blocks of work just before the World Champs. You can see the increase in fitness, but then you can see that the pink fatigue line, you know, falls away as we taper down, and then the yellow performance line, yeah, comes up. So that's that interplay of fitness and fatigue. So if we can remove fatigue, which we do by also you know, backing off training, then yeah, we get this increase in performance. Again, remember, these are, you know, they're arbitrary numbers, but if we can, you know, sort of track and model these trends in this way, then yeah, you know, it helps us understand what we've done, and it also helps because you can plot this stuff forwards. You know, it helps us understand what we might do to the athlete, you know, as we plan training going forward for them. Right. We also said right at the start of the session this morning, you know, we talked about planning sort of some key interventions as well, so you can map all of those into your training. So in here we've got, you can see the blocks of time that Tom used, the altitude tent, when he's actually away at altitude training camps, and obviously because Doha and the coming Olympic Games are in really challenging hot environments, then you know, we got some specific heat preparation in there. So in essence, this was, you know, getting us ready for Doha, but really it's actually it's a big plan in place for Olympic year, which is obviously on hold. But yeah, so you can track in there the difference, you know, where we've got some tests in terms of heat, some different interventions. So summer, it's in May, it's still pretty chilly and there's plenty of snow around. So if we're looking for a few heat adaptations, then we're yeah, after training outside, then we're getting the athletes in the sauna. Yeah, we've got some heat tests in there, and we've got our sort of final top up training leading into World Championships. So you can sort of build this, you know, this model. So we've got our initial just calendar at the start. This is when the key races are. Then we sort of slot in our key sort of training blocks, training camps, interventions in terms of tests and measurements, and the like. And then it's, yeah, we can track it all through on here. Right. Let's come back to some nice smooth lines. Okay, it's a lot easier to look at theoretically. All right. So this is a spreadsheet version. Yeah, and it's, yeah, highly theoretical, but it does show us the same principles. But so, you know, if we're doing a lot of training, so I think our senior performers from our little flow chart at the start would suggest that yeah, we might sort of periodize the year. Yeah, the other question was about sort of planning tapering as well. So if we're doing a lot of training, you know, then fatigue levels are high. So this, you know, if we can, there's scope there to have a big impact on performance if we've got high levels of fatigue. And you know, so certainly the idea of tapering training, so reducing the training load leading into competition, you know, I'm sure that has merit here. And so we've got our same, I think the scales are a little bit different here, but it's showing us the same thing. So we've got an initial level of performance is around 500 at the at the left hand side of the chart there on the axis, and so we've kind of got, we've labeled it here as like an overreaching stage for about 23, 24 days. So we've just sort of got stuck into training, and we can see there that fatigue is it's higher than the fitness, the blue line. Performance levels are low. They've actually dropped from the initial level, and then we start to adapt to that. And then it starts to plateau out and flatten out over a time on this model of over the next 100 days. And then we can see we get into a stage called supercompensation, which is our tapering stage. So here we're reducing fatigue by backing off and changing what we do in training, reducing the load, and we can see then that the performance level ramps up again, and it brings us to a new level of fitness, which is is just over 2,000 on whatever these the arbitrary load units are, just from the calculation. And if our target was that green dotted line there, we can see we've come pretty close to it. So so perhaps when we set our goals and mapped it all out at the start of the preparation stage, that would be suggest that was a realistic goal, although perhaps we've not quite met it on this chart, which when we'll come back to that point in a moment. All right. If at the other end of the scale we're working with young athletes, who are perhaps coming and doing 3 things down at the club once a week, then you can see, well, we do get a little super compensation here, but I guess it's in the real world, those 3 times that athletes are coming to the club, what we haven't got in there is how many times a week they're playing football, or other sports and doing school PE and whatever else that they're that they've got going on that will impact all of this. And hey, we might put a beautiful plan together with a tape because we want to squeak out a little bit more performance there. Quite possibly, before coming and competing, in a competition on Saturday afternoon, maybe I've been playing some team sport for the school that morning already. If we use the modelling, we can see. I guess we make a call on whether we decide that tapering is important for young athletes. But remember, we said at the start in terms of the planning process that we could consider, interventions of who might put it in place. It could just be that we, the way that we sort of organise the activities or the goals that we set are, much more sort of developmental, and we're changing sort of emphasis and activity compared to our senior performance, where it's very much about perhaps the physical level of performance, because there's a lot more fatigue to remove and a lot more potential to gain. So I think that's us knowing our athletes. We're at points in between. These could be the taper strategies of the 2 athletes we looked at our very first slide. Right. Let's just coming back to tapering and impact. How fatigue has an impact. So we've got that original chart that we looked at, but I just added a couple of notes on here. So remember, we're making a big assumption because structures and systems, all this a myriad of sort of rates of adaptation to a particular training session, and of course different intensities and durations and loads of training will impact on those systems and structures in a different way. Some things will, some intensities of training will impact on sort of centrally on things like like cardiac dimensions, and others will have a bigger impact on, at the periphery, on things like your capillary density or particular sort of enzymes for processing fuels. So yeah, we're making these big assumptions. But yeah, if we, in our model here, you've done a training session and the positive effects of that fitness are going to last you a month. And the negative effects of that, the fatigue, are going to last for a week, 7 days. Right. Without doing any more, without changing our training at all, but if we can have an impact on fatigue, if we can recover better from training sessions, then, and we've changed here, we've changed the chart to fatigue now for just 6 days, we can see that the performance has now taken us over the green line here. Okay, let's just go back to the previous slide. We mentioned this when we looked at the chart previously. Yeah, so maybe that peak performance has come up just short over that green target line. Is that a qualifying level performance to get invited to the British champs, to make a team, to qualify for the Olympics, whatever that might be. So if we change the fatigue level so that now fatigue only lasts for 6 days, then we've made no changes at all to training, but we have brought around about a high level of performance. Okay, and that would be impacting throughout that training cycle there. Okay, so I guess it's some long-term habits. Right. Okay, so how can we influence fatigue if that's actually going to help performance? So just sort of to bring this to a close. So there we go. So we've beasted our athlete on the track. They're exhausted, lying on the floor. Our work is done. How are we going to help them? How are we going to help them recover? In this example here, there's guys are in an ice bath. All right, does that have an impact? Well, it might. Shona Halson is a physiologist that works at the Australian Institute of Sport and is a world authority on recovery. So so the cold bath, that might have some impact. Okay, low intensity activity, jogging, having a massage. Okay, wearing some of the compression gear, or stretching post training. All of these things, they might have some impact. Okay, in terms of Halson's work, then what are the two biggest factors that have an impact? Okay, that will help you maximize recovery and reduce fatigue from exercise. Okay, dead simple: good nutrition and good sleep quality. Okay, so I've got a little logo up there for the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register, but having good simple nutrition, and sleeping well. So laying off the screens before you go to bed. Don't drink much coffee. Then don't suddenly decide to experiment with double espressos before you go to bed, because it'll impact on sleep. But those are two incredibly simple things that, and all of us can do these. Okay, and you don't need the likes of me to tell you that, because that's simple stuff that your mum can tell you that. So so we started out looking at putting a plan together, and then taking that through to the complexities of that in real life, and then some thoughts on actually, can we shift that, the yellow line, the performance line? If we can actually have an impact on reducing fatigue, then we might be able to achieve high level performances. but that, complexity and modeling, actually the biggest impact, as we said, is on the real simple stuff. So that's some ideas about planning periodization, how a sort of taper down actually kind of might work from a sort of a mathematical perspective, but then with hopefully with sort of some simple takeaways there that could have an impact on that and help us get the best out of ourselves. So if you've got any questions about today, then now's a good time to get them up on the screen. And I've got Helen helping me out again today. She'll get those on screen, and we can have a chat about those. So this goes on demand on not on the iPlayer, but on Athletics Hub through the England Athletics webpage. So you can have a look at this again and find all the other ones. Find part 1 of this as well on there. So let's have a look, see if we've got any questions. We've got that on. So right. Okay, Wondermoo, hi. During competitions and pre-competitions, what type of training are recommended? That's a great question. So we didn't, in terms of the specifics, and actually we put a picture up of Kate Spilsbury. Kate's PhD was on tapering. So if you go and search for Spilsbury on something like Google Scholar, you'll probably find some of her work and her ideas on tapering. But we're not going to do that right now. I'm going to try and answer the question. So we can reduce training load. So I think we're familiar with that. If we reduce the load, that takes away fatigue, and then performance is going to increase. Ways that we can do that. So of course we can drop the intensity of the training sessions. So we could do easier training. So that would take away training load. Or we could maintain our normal training intensities, but we could take away the duration of the training session. So we could do shorter training sessions. And that latter idea, so keep the intensity but drop the volume, I think is typical of the sort of current practice of athletes and coaches. So for example, we might, if we normally if we do a lot of interval training on Tuesdays, we might still be doing that on the Tuesday and the week before competition, but we're still pushing as hard, but we're doing less of those intervals. So we're cutting down the duration, and by doing that, if we cut down durations, it also allows us to kind of keep to regular routines of training, even if we're just doing smaller, the smaller volumes of training. But that's a key question. Hi, Lucas. What do we think about athletes rolling? I think we're talking about like foam rollers and the like, and that I think that would link it to the ideas about, would massage have an impact? Times in terms of like things like myofascial release, the fascia around, around muscles, and the fibers themselves. So, I think from that little bit of research we looked at, I think there's probably some merit in doing that. Particularly at the moment, if none of us can actually get to see a physio or get any soft tissue, then that's probably a potentially a lifesaver for quite a few people. Right. Hi, Phil. Good question. Is sports to have a negative effect on race walk training and prep versus technique? I don't know really. I'm not sure. In terms of like one of our key principles of training is specificity. So yeah, clearly, if you want to be successful in race walking competitions, you need to do a fair bit of, race walking and training. But and if we're at a young stage, if you recall, when we looked at some of the talent development webinars a few weeks ago, we looked at a model from Australia, from Brent, the coach there, was talking about, and much like when we had the really complex slide that we looked at today with the, that kind of little flow chart of how to decide whether to periodize or not. It said, have we got basic skills? At a young age, we get to great basic skills from a wide variety of activity and sport. So that's probably a kind of a priority for me at that stage of development. Later on, as you really kind of specialize and go for it, then I guess we use, have, I guess, more and more of our training then is very, very specific. I'm not aware of things that have a real negative impact. Cool. Hi, Steve. Junior athletes and training load change. How would you know when to increase the load model? And that's one of our big, that is one of our challenges. We looked at this in a previous webinar in terms of trying to get some ideas on how to, how much training should young athletes do. And it's highly individual. It's wrapped up in, not only sort of the very sort of mechanistic models of maturation, but there's their sort of psychosocial ability to understand your training loads. It is a big challenge. Certainly after a big challenging point is if athletes are going through a growth spurt, and then loading up athletes, appropriately then when structures and tissues are actually, are growing and changing at a rapid rate. That's the time where we have to be, incredibly careful. And I guess, that's when some of the tools, like the session rating of perceived exertion, or maybe, starting to, if athletes, might start to record and take an interest in what they're doing in the training sessions. So we're using training diaries and we're starting to map out and record some of these things. And then if we start to plan this with athletes, as coaches, you can plan these models forward. So then, we can work out if we're ramping them up too soon is going to be risky. So I didn't give you a direct answer in terms of that, but I think that is our big challenge. Wonderful. Thanks for your question. What we've got: while overtraining, sometimes injuries and over fatigue, what is the cause? Well, I guess I think that's probably linked to Steve's question as well. We want to. And actually, I think the answer was on the. I think I was then saw this question come up. So, so I guess it's looking at if we load athletes up too quickly, then that's clearly a real sort of pinch point for getting injured. Or if we just if we don't add in rest periods and we don't get the management of training right, then we're going to run into fatigue. And that's when we start to look at, because these are the challenges that happen in general with pretty motivated and switched on athletes who are making a choice about their sort of investing in what they're doing and finding out how good they can be. So, but that's perhaps when we start to look at things like nutrition, but with support from appropriate professionals in that, appropriately qualified individuals to help us look at some of those things. In next week's session, we're going to look at start looking at physiology. That takes us into sort of tests and measurements. So that's all linked into planning training as well. So if we've got some idea about the initial ability and level of the athlete, then we can build training appropriately. Cool. Hi Dawn, where would I find a local group to me? Yeah, England, I guess you're through England Athletics. You're looking for for athletics clubs. If we're looking for for where there's sort of race walk activity specifically, then another good source would be looking on the webpage by from the Race Walking Association. So you could have a look on there as well. Or fire me an email and we can have a chat, see where you're at. And then I might have an idea of who to hook you up with. Hi Lucas, can you use running for walking training? Okay, I think most of the people that I coach do some running, but it's not for any of the specific training. Use it for recovery. Our training principles around specificity would tell us that we would if we want to get good at race walking, we need to do a lot of race walking training. But if we're doing but certainly in terms of sort of athletes, senior athletes doing a lot of training, then we use we have some runs for recovery. For young athletes, in terms of wanting sort of all-round athleticism and good physical literacy, then there's a place for it there, because we're still enjoying lots of we're not specializing yet. Cool. I can see, Helen's just dropped in a question. Cool. So we've got a couple of minutes left. If we wanted to have a look at anything else, right, just to I can see one move's put in is typing. So I'll see if pings up a question. Cool. So these the webinars are on. You can have a look at them on Athletics Hub through England Athletics webpage, and look at some of the other ones that we've done as well on the Racewalk group. So next week we're looking at we've got a couple of sessions coming up then on physiology. So trying to kind of understand our event group through physiology, and then a second session on sort of looking at how we can sort of predict performance from tests and measurements. And all of these things are kind of interlinked. So if you want a discussion about a deeper discussion on sort of the training loads that we've talked about and some of the questions that have come up on on fatigue and overtraining and the like, some of the physiology will get us into that. As would one of the early sessions, seems like ages ago now, we had Cara Sloss on, our nutritionist, talking about those things. So in choosing a particular topic, in the reality of coaching is that all of these things interact and overlap with each other. There's a massive psychological element in terms of sort of fatigue and overtraining as well. So we're as we're addressing and answering some questions on a topic, then immediately it throws up more. Gives us ideas then for planning further webinars in the future. So all right, a couple of people typing away to see if there you go. But as people saying, thank you, fantastic, cheers. That's great. Right, okay, we'll excellent. Good. Well, we've got a few minutes left, so well done, Lucas. Got that in. What's your view on self-coached athletes? well, clearly there are a number of athletes, you know, who are self-coached. I guess flip that round. So nothing wrong with that at all. What is the advantage of having a coach? I should have a business card at this point. Yeah, or Helen should. I think a coach can be, you know, can be that little bit removed from what you're doing, and it just allows perhaps some objectivity, you know, as well as just introducing you and helping you learn sort of skills and the like for getting a grasp of the event. But you know, certainly sort of senior performers, you know, almost sort of you know, becoming a you know, just sort of mentoring athletes and offering different viewpoints. You know, as a bit of a pop psychologist, I guess. Yeah, I think there's big value in having a coach. And if we actually look, you know, in the UK, if we look at where there's real strong activity, it's where there are coaches. Yeah, so I think, you know, I think that also sort of answers things from that perspective as well. So yeah, cool. Right, I think we'll take that as our last question. And yep, that was just a couple of people just saying thanks. Great stuff. Right, okay. I hope that was useful to everybody. By all means, you know, ping me an email if you've got specific stuff, especially if you've got ideas about other topics you'd like us to have a look at. But otherwise, we're back next week, same time, looking at physiology. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Take care. See you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.